Good morning, everyone. If it is morning where you are, hi. My name's Bethan Vincent, and I am the marketing director at Netsells. We're a product and software development consultancy based in the beautiful historic city of York in the UK, if you couldn't tell from my accent. If you don't know where York is, it's essentially kind of the Winterfell of the United Kingdom. It's cold, it's rainy, it's snowy. Luckily today, though, the sun is shining, which is very unusual. So I'm going to give you a really super quick background on myself, not as a sales pitch, but just to help you locate where this talk is coming from and why I'm talking about some of the things I'm talking about here. So I've been a marketeer for about 10 years now. Gosh, I am that old. And I've worked for technology companies for the past 5 years. And I've really sat in that kind of marketing leadership position for the most part, but I've also been part of product teams as well. So working on kind of defining and refining. And most has already been sat at the kind of messy intersection between product marketing and engineering and trying to get things done and coming up with roadblocks and teams disagreeing on what the right path forward is. So that's really where a lot of this talk is coming from, my kind of experiences of trying to run CRO programs in slightly messy environments, but doing the best I can. So yes, this talk today is about full funnel CRO. And really my aim is to hopefully inspire you to think a little bit differently about your CRO program, the things you test, and the reasons why you test as well. So to start off with, we'll go into kind of what is conversion rate optimization. So this is Moz's definition. It's pretty handy, you know, the process of increasing the percentage of website visitors who take a desired action. Great. And then you've got your micro conversions. So that's a small step on the path to your macro conversion. So a micro conversion can be downloading an ebook, to clicking through to a product page, to signing up to a newsletter. And then your macro conversion is normally the thing that you as a marketeer or department are KPI'd on. So that could be, you know, leads if you're kind of lead gen, or it could be if you're an e-com business, you know, people checking out the cart. And this is a fine definition. I don't see much wrong with it, but I do think it's quite limiting. And I think as most of us, I mean, who's not a digital marketeer now, most of our focus is kind of spent on improving our digital assets, because we see that as the place where, you know, most of our customer interactions happen. That's also the place where we can see the data and measure things, which I think is good, but slightly problematic, because we're always going to focus on the what is tangible, what we can see, what we can experience. And then in terms of the kind of real basic funnel, you know, often we think kind of people come in through channels. That can be digital channels, it could be offline as well. They'll come onto our website, they'll have some sort of decision-making process on that site, and then they'll convert, and it's all nice and linear. And, you know, we define those channels that consumers use. We define the experience on the website. We're in control of everything. Well, the thing is, experience really matters for a consumer, for a start, or for a user, or whatever you want to call them. It's not just limited to the channels we can define. And to kind of illustrate this, I'll give you a bit of a story from my kind of lockdown experience of the past year. So obviously I live in the UK. I really like going to the pub. The pub is my kind of happy place, meeting friends, having a pint, having some fish and chips. Oh, it is the dream. And I recently moved house. So I moved from York to a smaller village in the outside of York. And York has 365 pubs. It's got a pub for every day of the year. It's amazing. It has 2 pubs. And when I got here, one of the first things I did was went and checked out the pubs. That keen. And one of them is really, really beautiful. The facade is pristine. They've got wonderful kind of chairs and tables, a really nice outside area. They've got lovely kind of gardens. They've really taken care of their plants, and they've got a really good looking menu. It's very kind of exciting and lots of kind of different drinks and stuff. So my immediate first impression was like, oh my God, this is going to be my local. This is the place to go. And I went and looked at the other pub, and, you know, it was a bit kind of dirty on the outside building. You know, some of the roof tiles were coming off. The windows weren't very clean. The menu, I couldn't actually read it because there was like so much mud on the menu. I think from cars passing by had, you know, splashed it a little bit. And my immediate gut reaction was like, this isn't the one for me. the other one's so much nicer. And it was a second kind of first impressions kind of gut feel. And as I've got to know more people in the village, they've said like pub number 1 is good, the nice pristine one, but pub number 2 is amazing. Like their beer selection is wonderful. You should definitely go and try it out. But the problem is I've made this kind of, I believe them, I believe it's good, but I've made this kind of gut reaction decision that I'm still a bit like, huh, are you sure? Like it just doesn't feel right. And you know, this is the thing. Our customers are irrational humans. I know this is a super irrational kind of response, and I'm sure it's absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure one day I will try it out. But there's just something about it that doesn't feel right, and it is that gut kind of first reaction. But the problem is, when we go back to this kind of conception of the very linear funnel, people are going to kind of do what we want. They're going to follow the paths we've set out for them. I think, how do we reconcile that with the fact our customers are irrational and will do kind of weird and wonderful things? And we like to customer behavior. And I think this can cause a lot of problems. And I think this sometimes kind of closes our mind off to what the actual customer experience is. And I really love this quote. I love this quote because our customers aren't just data points on Google Analytics. That is probably how the majority of us interact with them. But our customers are humans and they have stories, and these stories are their experience. And they're not concerned with our funnels. They're not concerned with our models. They're concerned with doing what they want to do and achieving the result they want to achieve. And we're hopefully there to help them and get them on their way to doing that in the easiest, simplest way possible. That's the goal, right? And yes, we've got all of these kind of like conceptions about the customer journey. You know, a lot of us kind of segment things into tofu, mofu, bofu. I love how marketeers love acronyms. I showed this slide to my partner and he was like, what is this? We do, we like our models. We like to kind of categorize things and make it make sense. And I'm not saying that's a huge problem. But the thing is, we think about the customer journey being very kind of linear. You know, a customer will find us through our awareness content. Then they will click through to our kind of consideration content. Then they will go and they will purchase. And that should be really clear to see. And why would they ever do anything else? But the thing is, what our customers actually experience, their actual journeys, look a bit more like this. So this is the London Tube map, if you're not familiar. And every kind of station along the way is a touch point. And customers, obviously, they'll go to multiple different stations, they'll experience multiple different touch points, but it'll be a kind of a messy web of things as opposed to kind of really clear kind of cut journeys across the map. And you may find there are some commuter routes, and commuter routes will be the paths that customers kind of follow. And you'll see kind of in aggregate, you'll get more kind of traction and more traffic down certain paths, but you'll also have outliers as well. You'll have kind of remote stations that people with. And then see the map of the London Tube extends way beyond this. It's linked to all different kind of networks within the UK. It's not just this small kind of ecosystem. And really, if you're looking at it, you wouldn't get full kind of visibility of what's going on. And that's the same for your customers. They don't kind of with you within the area you've set up for them. They will interact with you in multiple different ways that you won't necessarily have the visibility. We've got to the point in the talk where you're like, okay, great, thanks for that. That's really useful. Said all of our models are wrong. We're thinking about things in the wrong way. What can we do about this? You know, you've said it's more complex. You said people are just kind of embrace and live with that. And the answer is yes, we do need to think about things a little bit differently. I'm not trying to blow kind of what you're doing out the water and say it's completely wrong, especially if you're running quite sophisticated CRO programs. But I am trying to inspire you to just think a little bit outside the box. So how do we make sense of all of this? And the fact that people are not going to do what we tell them to do. We don't have full visibility into the funnel, and the customer experience and the customer journey is a little bit more complicated than we might imagine. So as I said at the beginning, a lot of what I'm about to talk about is really from my experiences of doing this work. And it's very kind of located in working for small to medium companies. And this may not resonate. If you work for $1 billion company, you will have a lot more resources to throw at this than I ever did. But if you're someone kind of sitting in a company that maybe doesn't have a CRO program or it's kind of small scale, these are some of the things I think you should be thinking about. So starting off with number one, expanding the view of our funnel. Because as I said, we may only see a certain kind of proportion of interactions our customers have with us. Those are normally digital because those are normally the ones we can measure, but the web and the network extends a lot beyond that. The example of the pub I gave is interesting because, how would they ever know that I made that gut reaction upon seeing them? Unless someone was stood outside at the point I was kind of walking past, checking and scoping things out, there's no data point there for them to measure on Google Analytics. It literally would have to be someone asking me what was going on and why I wasn't going in. And we've got to kind of make sure that we can capture, or at least kind of understand those moments. We won't necessarily be able to get all of them. Some of them we simply can't be there to measure, but we need to try. So in terms of expanding our view of the funnel, we need to be regularly speaking to our customers and our audience. And I don't just mean, yes, we send out a survey every 6 months. I mean, that's great. You should be doing that. But surveys will give you kind of an interesting snapshot of time, especially if you're doing on this kind of regular cycle, I guess. But they won't necessarily give you the kind of nitty gritty of what's going on. And really, you need to have a conversation with people. That's the best way of doing it, this real kind of qualitative research piece. So to give you an example of how, well, this enlightened me recently, I've just done a series of kind of customer interviews at Netsells, and I always ask, how did you find us? What was your journey like? What did you type into Google? Asked this of a customer, and they said, oh, well, we didn't really at the beginning know exactly what we were looking for, so we typed this kind of search term into Google, and I was there like, oh my god, like that's not even on our radar. It would never cross my mind that people would search for that when they were looking for our services. And so I kind of said, like, yeah, can you explain this a bit further? And they really kind of explained the rationale behind why they would put in this search term. We're not even on the radar for that. That's not something that's ever been kind of put into our content plan. That's a bit of a dark spot, a kind of blind spot on the map that we'd never considered before. And that conversation was so enlightening because I could kind of say, I could take that back to the team and say, we need to be doing this. We need to be making sure that we are here when the customer is thinking about this. And those kind of insights, which are absolute gold, you probably won't ever get from a survey. I mean, if you do surveys, have a think about your response rate and the type of information you get. The quantitative stuff will normally be quite good. There's a lot of bias in those surveys as well, because the people who are most likely to respond to them are the ones who are either very happy with your offering and very happy to give you good feedback, or the ones who want to complain. You're very unlikely to get that middle ground of people who aren't incentivized enough to complain or to be gushing about you. You need to actually go out to speak to people. So do this regularly and get the whole marketing team involved. If you have a very kind of distinct CRO team or research team, it shouldn't just be them speaking to customers. Everyone should have that responsibility. I would say everyone across the business should have that responsibility, but at least everyone in the marketing department should be going out and having these qualitative, in-depth conversations. I've actually found during lockdown, it's been a lot easier in some ways to get people to speak to you, because this idea of jumping on a phone call or a Zoom call is a lot more entrenched. So you will find that your customers maybe are a bit more receptive to having those conversations. And this brings me on to the next point, because making those introductions to customers and kind of saying like, hey, we're marketing and we want to come and talk to you, that can be a little bit tricky. And this is where you need to be making friends with other people throughout the business. And the theme of kind of collaboration and transparency will crop up a lot through this talk. Big kind of believer in it. But you do need to be speaking to other departments, and especially sales. And I know sales, they're the bane of our life, but they're also our greatest ally and friends. And the thing is, because sales will often, because they're having quite in-depth conversations with customers, come across pieces of information that are a lot more useful to you. And again, I don't mean kind of speaking to sales in that kind of like, yes, we have a regular monthly catch up. You should be getting involved much more closely with them. Other departments that are super useful in terms of this kind of research piece, customer success. Again, they interface with the customer very regularly, so they're obviously going to have a lot more information as well. And account management, if that's kind of concept or a department within your business, make friends with them. They will help you out, especially on the customer research piece. You've also got to include the post-purchase experience. And if you work in SaaS, you will be very concerned with churn. That will be something you're definitely thinking about. But if you're not in SaaS, probably the post-purchase experience is not something you get heavily involved in. And I'd argue you absolutely have to when you're trying to create uplifts in your funnel. You're trying to convert more customers, because we all know the statistic that's bandied about it's much cheaper to keep the customers you have and keep them happy and spending with you than to acquire new ones. And your CRO program absolutely has to be aligned with that. And then finally, try being a customer yourself. And this is really funny. I recently did this, and I really put myself in the customer's shoes and think, like, what would I do? What would I search for? Where would my journey start? And that can enlighten you to the bits of the map you're not present on, my example earlier, but it also can show you where it's a little bit kind of, the interaction just doesn't feel quite right. It can give you that kind of heuristic gut feeling of, this is a bit crap, this landing page is not very compelling, or this kind of customer interaction I'm having on a chatbot is not doing. And then really, to come back to my theme of centralizing information, sharing with other departments, really you want to almost at this point create a bit of a flow chart around the customer journey. And this will include the different strands, much like my London Tube map. It won't be a kind of, customer starts here, goes to this stage, goes to this stage, goes to this stage, this linear kind of thing. That won't be true, because the more you dig into your data, the more you speak to people, you'll understand there's multiple different paths people take, multiple different touch points, and they're doing lots of different things. But if you can start to kind of visualize that, and again, flowchart's a really good way of doing that, you can start kind of understanding what you're dealing with, what's the surface that you kind of can control, you can kind of optimize, and where are the kind of holes in your customer journey that you can potentially plug. So, and then once you've started building up that map, as I said, you'll have a bit of a gut feeling on what's going on. Experience isn't amazing, but you'll also start, especially if you're you're looking at the website and you've got data to deal with, where do the numbers not stack up? Where percentage click-through rate looking a bit shabby? Is your good enough? Is it in line with industry standards? And this can start helping you pinpoint the best areas to run tests and optimize. So on the subject of running tests, I'm not going to go into loads of depth into how to run a CRO kind of program. We all know about the build, measure, test, learn loop. And there's a lot of literature online that you can go and read, and I can't cover in this kind of 40 minutes I've got here. But this is where we start. We've understood our customer journey. We've thought about the funnel in a bit more depth and thought about the things that maybe we don't have data on. We've spoken to our customers to validate that is actually their experience of the customer journey. Now we've got to try and change things up. We've got to put in always the data points trying to get something done. Kind of full, like, this is how you'll see. I'm not sure, I hope you can see, we experience UI, here we are. So you can kind of dig into, what's the actual kind of like interface like that people are using? Can you kind of change that? You can also dig into the kind of what's going on through kind of user feedback. So Hotjar is the tool that I use the most. I think it's great. So pop-ups asking, how did you find this page? Did you manage to do what you were looking for? And if you're working with a product, you can bake these kind of things into your product as well. It doesn't have to be purely on your website. If you've got an app, user feedback is kind of really interesting in terms of kind of app performance and keeping people kind of engaged with your app. And then mouse tracking, heat mapping, all of that kind of stuff. And this can give you a lot of interesting kind of information. And there's a lot of things you can kind of manipulate and change, and you can get very detailed feedback and very detailed data on whether that change worked or not. And I think, again, this is why we gravitate towards online CRO, because it's easier. And that's fine, and often the web experience, the digital experience of our company is the one that the consumers do care about the most. But when we come on to offline CRO, and this is probably the thing you read in the talk description and you were like, what? What does she mean by, is that a thing? Absolutely, certainly is a thing. And I've got a couple of examples for you to just kind of to spark off your thinking. So a study by Nike showed that adding cents to their store increased intent to purchase by 80%. And I imagine how they measured that is they asked customers upon exit about that intent to purchase. And they would have done it as a split test almost. One day the store has a cent, one day the store doesn't have a cent. We measure what people say about their different experiences on the different day. That is conversion optimization, surely. Another experiment, and these both happened in the US, was where they pumped coffee smell into a petrol station, a gas station, and that increased drink purchases by 300%. And they could get very direct data for this, obviously, from their point of sale system, from their till, on how many drinks were ran through the till that day. That's conversion optimization. And these are examples where they were able to kind of really get data on what the uplift was. But sometimes you may not be able to do that. And this is because offline CRO is often kind of a bit more intangible than online CRO. It's more about kind of the customer's feeling, the smell, the interactions. And an example of this from kind of my work, before the pandemic, used to do a lot of events, a lot of kind of event sponsorship. I've sponsored loads of conferences, I've stood on stands and all of that kind of stuff. Really great way of generating business, really enjoyable. And we would run little kind of tests and experiments. So an experiment we would run was changing the stand setup. So trying to kind of create a setup that was more enticing for people to come over, so it was more eye-catching and had more space for us to speak to people, because often you have a big table in the way and that's not very conducive to a conversation. And how did we measure whether the experiment was successful or not? To be perfectly honest, it was a bit of a gut feel. And this is this idea of heuristic optimization. It just felt better. It just felt whether those conversations were more natural or not. One of the things is, especially if you're working kind of B2B, especially B2B software, your sales cycles will be really, really long. And this can be a problem when it comes to conversion rate optimization, because you might you might try and optimize something, you might run a test, but really to get to that final metric, your macro conversion, which would be closely tied to revenue, to measure whether this kind of test actually impacts revenue, you might be waiting years. So sometimes you just need this information up front. Another thing we used to do on the stands, and this was actually measurable, was change the swag. And the way that people like the swag more or less from conference to conference or stand to stand was, did people tweet about it more? Did we get more kind of like, oh, hey, we got this really cool thing from this company? It's a way of measuring. It's slightly indirect, but it's an indication and it gives you a gut feel. And if we're saying the whole customer experience matters, if we go back to my point about, with the pub, that was my first, I was like, I'm choosing A over B here. Your first impression for a lot of people, especially if you do a lot of events or kind of networking in-person stuff, that's that kind of intangible thing. You can't necessarily kind of fully measure it, but trying to make it better is super, super important, because let's face it, if you turn someone off right at the beginning of their customer journey with you, you're very unlikely to get them coming back in further down the funnel. It's going to be just a lot harder. And other things you can do with print is interesting, because you can kind of measure that, QR codes and things like that, referral kind of codes. There are proxies for measuring the success of things, or kind of direct data you can get. So just have a think about, if you've mapped out your customer journey, you've kind of followed the first step, what are the things that you can potentially kind of influence? Especially you'll find the offline part is earlier on in the customer journey. Is it, people have a chat with your salesperson and your salesperson never gives them a card to follow up with. That's like that's a really tiny optimization, but it can be really, really important. And this is the original point of my talk that I made at the introduction, was I just want you to think a little bit outside the box on what we can do here, because every interaction matters. In terms of, we've talked a little bit about qualitative and quantitative, and I have a really good friend, Michael Rippin, who is a CRO expert, and I love the way he talks about this, because he's like, the quantitative information gives you the what is going on. So the quantitative data on, how many users click through on a website shows you potentially where there's a drop off, where something isn't that performant at the moment, where there is opportunity for optimization, and if you went about kind of improving that page, there's something page, but you don't necessarily understand exactly what's going on. And this is where the quality comes in, because the quality really gives you kind of why behind is suboptimal. And you can try and do everything with quantitative information, but you're going to be making a difference. So where you can, try and collect both. Try and have those conversations with people, try and qualitative feedback, and try and kind of corroborate that with your quantitative, get that how and what is going on, but really the why. And that will give much more powerful insights to make much more powerful recommendations for tests to hopefully kind of uplift things. So creating an objective methodology for prioritization, interesting. So you probably got a point where you understand the customer journey, you understand a bit wrong, you've thought about what you can test, you've thought about maybe some offline tests you can run. Obviously, one of the hardest things of my job, and it becomes harder the more senior you get in marketing, is your job is essentially effective resource management. You have 1,000 different options of things you can do, channels you can be on, pieces of content you can write. Choice is limitless almost. And this is the same with testing. You could run 1 million tests, you could have the ideas for them, but actually you probably don't have the resources to put them into place. And especially when it comes to kind of online, one of the things I find is you often can't put those tests into practice on your own. You will need to collaborate with another department, often engineering or development, to put that into place, to make those changes. And really you need to be able to advocate for the value of running the test, because it's opportunity cost. Every time you try and make a change or use resources, there's something else you could be doing that might have a better result. So how do you kind of influence people to essentially get on board and understand why you're running these tests? So this is the framework I use, and it is really unashamedly simple. Like, it's super simple. I've seen some hypotheses frameworks that are, they have 10 kind of scoring criteria. It's got to be approved by 10 different people. And that just makes you slow. The whole point of running these tests is to improve things quickly. The whole point is to try and make changes quickly. And there's kind of a saying in the software world that cycle time compression, so the speed at which you can make changes, is the biggest determiner of winners and losers in technology. And I absolutely believe the same is true in marketing. The faster you can change things for the better, the faster you can make improvements, click-through rates in your funnel, micro or macro, the faster you can impact revenue. And the faster you can impact revenue, to be perfectly honest, the better you're going to look. And also, the faster your company is going to make money, which ultimately, that's the ultimate goal of marketing, is to generate more revenue. What you do that, what the hell are we doing? This is the way I like to prioritize my tests. So on the left-hand side, you've got the test hypotheses. These are, just the things you've kind of said, like, I think it would be interesting if we did this. And then you've got your property or channel. And this is just to kind of give you that information on what's the split of your test. So if you're trying to test everything on the website, that may not be possible. Obviously, you've got the issue of if you're running kind of concurrent tests, they might impact each other. You might not be able to kind of fully see what's going on. So I just like to pop that in, super, super simple. You've then got the stage. Again, this is kind of a rough kind of my gut feel on what stage this might be impacting. And again, that's to kind of stop you from bunching everything together. If you're testing everything at the consideration phase, you might be missing out on some really kind of like interesting and big wins at the kind of awareness phase or the purchase phase. And also you might be having tests that are kind of impacting each other. Now, sometimes you will have that. That's just kind of going to happen. But ideally, you want to be able to isolate the improving the impact of that, and then collect the data to be able to make kind of, I guess, a statistically significant decision on whether that's an or not. And if you're bunching everything together, that data can become a little bit kind of influenced by the other tests. Then you've got owner. And I put the owner in because I want it, when I share this sheet around, I want it to be really, really clear to other departments that I'm doing it with them. It's not just marketing's responsibility. So you've got the updated sales documentation featuring improved delivery process, which will help sales close more deals. Sales should be really interested in marketing running that test, you know, and seeing whether deals. So, and sales will probably have to lead on that test as well in terms of like actually how it's kind of formatted, what the changes are. So you've then got the scoring matrix. This is, again, super, super simple. So you've got feasibility. I give everything a score out of 5. You could do it out of 10. You could do it out of 100 if you wanted. Out of 5 just seems simpler. Okay, kind of, we can reduce the administrative burden on everyone, the faster we can probably get things into kind of production in terms of tests. So feasibility, that's the ease and speed. So you would think updating sales documentation, updating kind of proposals and things, that's probably going to be a little bit more labor intensive and take a little bit longer than running kind of a simple contact form test on a site, you would hope. You've then got impact. And this is kind of, again, a bit of a heuristic number in terms of, you know, do you think the impact of the test, do you think the test will have a really big impact on your goals, on your ultimate kind of revenue goals? So, you know, helping sales close deals, yes, I think that's going to have a really big impact on our revenue goals, so I'm going to score that higher. Getting a conversion rate up on a contact form, yes, that's pretty important too. And holding an in-person event with fewer no-shows because it's in person, not online, yes, I think that's probably going to help. It's probably not as impactful as updating that sales documentation. You've then got potential for improvement. Sorry, the column has cut off one, hasn't cut off the L, just put it on another line. Potential for improvement. So what do I mean by this? Essentially, again, another kind of like heuristic assessment. Do you think by improving this, by running this kind of test, by proving or disproving this hypothesis, you're taking something from a 0 to a 10? That's a huge potential for improvement. You know, if the hypothesis was adding a contact form to our site will increase the number of people who contact us, that's you can see how that would be a 10. Some things are kind of just little tweaks, so you might score them a little bit lower. And again, this is a sheet that I would create and I would share around the business I was working in. I would share with other departments. I would share with my kind of higher ups to be like, yes, we've got a program of testing work on. Yes, I'm going to need resources for it. This is how I've determined, or we as a team have determined with other department input, what to test, why it's prioritized. And that's extremely powerful. It puts you in a really good position for asking for more resources because you can evidence why you're doing something. One thing that comes up, especially because I've worked on a lot of kind of smaller sites over my career, is, you know, having the data to run statistically significantly quite problematic. One of the things I like to do where possible is aggregate tests. And this is totally a tactic stolen from PPC. And what that means essentially, let's say you want to test a new kind of headline messaging. You want to test kind of a new proposition. Could you run that test both on your website and on social media, paid social, and on another kind of platform or channel, and then look at that data as on whether that proposition A performs better than proposition B? Because let's say if your traffic is quite low on your site, you might have to be running, if you're just purely, you know, homepage proposition A/B test, you're going to be running for that for quite a long time to determine kind of statistical significance. If you can do it across multiple different properties and aggregate those results, it might get you there a lot faster. And that goes back to my kind of cycle time compression point. The faster we do things, the faster we test, the faster we get results, the faster we know we've made an improvement, the better things are going to be. Agile testing. So I'm not going to fully go into like how to run an agile test and what agile marketing looks like. I've done kind of a number of talks. I've written a couple of things on my website if you want to dig a little bit using the agile framework to run marketing departments. But what I like to do is, you know, I've got my hypotheses matrix. 5 tests at a time, that's the capacity I have. I need to start batching up my tests into sprints, and sprints are just time boxed iterations. It's just a 4 to 6 week period, and you say we're going to run 5 tests. These are the 5 tests. that we pulled out from, the highest scoring from our hypotheses matrix. We're going to run those in those 4 to 6 weeks. And you may need to report, the test might run longer than the 4 to 6 weeks, but the actual work of putting it in place, you want to get done in that clear kind of time box. And what I like about kind of really batching things up into sprints is, especially when you're trying to integrate with developers or engineering teams, if you can align with their workflows. And I imagine most of you have development teams that run on kind of agile workflows. If you can do that, it's going to be much easier to kind of say like, hey, like we work in sprints, we've written this up as like a full kind of user story and whatever, and we just want to pass that to you so you can run it in your next sprint. That handover is just going to be a lot more seamless. And I've talked about reporting outside of sprints. You may want a review in a month or whatever, and just a block of time so you can actually go back and see what the results of the test are. And then finally, bringing together the data. So you're probably going to be running a number of different tests across a number of different properties. You could be doing websites, you could be doing online, offline, all of that stuff. How do you bring things together? So this is the stack I use. So you've got GitLab and Monday.com. So GitLab is essentially kind of developer tooling, but it has some really good features around running sprints and doing kind of agile software development, but you can kind of integrate with that as marketeers and kind of jump on board that. Monday.com is also kind of my preferred project management lab as well. It's really important, when you've got this kind of testing program to work through, you've got to have some structure around it. And this is often where I see people go a little bit wrong, where the testing is very ad hoc. There's no kind of roadmap for it. It's just like, oh, we've had an idea, let's run a test. That's just not going to cut it. You need to have a little bit of structure around things. And especially in terms of reporting, having kind of set reporting periods where you're bringing together that data and presenting it back to the company. I've got Lucidchart up there. That's just essentially flowchart software. I always think it's really useful to kind of start mapping out, or you will have mapped out that customer journey, but start to kind of assign the data alongside that customer journey so you can really see what the flows are. You can really see what the bottlenecks are. You've then got Google Sheets. I love Google Sheets. Never want to use Excel again. But Google Sheets is great for pulling in data from analytics, from Google Ads and stuff like that. If you're bringing together data from outside the Google ecosystem, I really recommend Supermetrics as a kind of connector. It has a lot of kind of good integrations that are kind of native within the product that you can jump on board. It makes things really, really easy. And then obviously you want to pull everything together into a bit of a master spreadsheet at the end of the day. But in terms of communicating that back to your stakeholders and showing kind of what the tests have achieved, you probably don't want to be giving people spreadsheets. So this is where bottom left-hand side is Google Data Studio. I have no idea why I couldn't find a logo that had the name that was transparent. But anyway, Google Data Studio, amazing for kind of dashboarding. That's how I would present the results back to the wider team and really kind of explain the narrative behind why we test things. I've got my testing kind of hypotheses matrix that's all prioritized, and then these are the results. And then these are the next batch of tests we're going to run. And it just creates that kind of confidence. You're doing things with structure, you're doing things for a reason, and you can measure the results as well, which ultimately, if you do a lot of marketing reporting, or your job involves kind of reporting to other stakeholders within the business or people senior to you, you need to be able to prove that the efforts you're expending are bringing back a reward for the company. And again, this is my real point around centralized reporting, around transparency. It's really, really important if you can make your dashboards available to anyone in the business. Again, that's just going to be a great way to kind of advocate for your work. If you're asking people for favors, like, hey, we just need your help with a test, you can show them like, these are all the improvements we've made. This is all of the data. And we want you to kind of be part of that. And we want your help to kind of improve these. It's just going to be, you're going to get a lot more buy-in basically that way. And then finally, we'll have some time for questions, but I just want to say that good enough does beat perfect. I think a lot of people wait to start a kind of conversion rate optimization program until they have the right level of data or they have the right infrastructure in place. You can run tests manually. A lot of the offline tests I talked about are pretty kind of manual, and it's very unlikely you're going to make a change that's for the worse. Realistically, like, who's going to think like, yeah, let's ruin our website? I really want to make a horrible user experience for people. And often the kind of tolerances we're working with, unless if you're working for $1 billion company, a small tolerance is going to have a huge impact. But when you're working for a smaller company, you know, if you're making a change that decreases the conversion rate by a little bit, it's very unlikely that's going to have a huge material impact, and you're going to miss out on the opportunity cost of making a change that improves things. So just have a go, get stuck in. You're not going to do things that are going to be bad. Ultimately, you know, none of us do this job to not do a good job, if that makes sense. So thank you very much. We do have 5 minutes for questions. If for whatever reason you don't want to speak to me kind of now and ask a question now, I'm on Twitter. I do all the tweeting and stuff like that. And finally, if you want to find out a bit more about Netsells, some of the really cool stuff, some of the really amazing clients we work with and work we do, please do head on over to our website. Thank you very much. Time for questions. Not sure there are any questions yet, so yeah, do pop them in the chat if you have any. Nope, no questions. I think then we will say thank you very much, and it's been, you know, my pleasure to be here. I think maybe there were a couple of issues with sound. I really apologise for that. The joys of rural village internet connection, I think. But yeah, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. If you're on there, that would be amazing. So thank you very much. Now I've got that awkward thing where I don't know whether I should just go or stay. It's all good. I'll stick around. If anyone's got a question, just give me a shout.